Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today, Anyone Can Advocate, a conversation with AFSP Advocates. I'm Stephanie Marburger, and I'm the Manager of Grassroots Advocacy and Operations with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP. I work in AFSP's Public Policy Office, which operates out of Washington, D.C. It's May Mental Health Month, and as a part of AFSP's campaign to demand more for mental health, we wanted to have a conversation about one of the most effective ways you can make a difference, using your voice to be an advocate for suicide prevention and mental health. Today, we're going to have a conversation with 3 seasoned AFSP advocates. Our goal is to help viewers better understand how everyone can advocate to achieve AFSP's mission to save lives and give hope to those affected by suicide. I'm very excited to say that today we are joined by James Bila. He is one of the co-founders of the AFSP Alaska chapter and has sat on the AFSP Alaska board for the last 11 years. James has been an AFSP advocate for 12 years, including as a leading field ambassador. In 2017, James received the Sandy Martin Grassroots Award for his advocacy efforts. Since 2018, he has been a member of the AFSP National Public Policy Council, a council of AFSP Grass Tops volunteers who make recommendations to AFSP about public policy. James lives in rural Southwest Alaska in Bethel, 400 air miles from Anchorage. We are also joined by Marissa Grayson, who has been a volunteer for the AFSP Alabama chapter since 2008. She served as the president of the Alabama Board of Directors from 2016 to 2020 and served on the board from 2010 to 2021. She has served as the chair of the Alabama Public Policy Committee and as a field ambassador. Marissa can often be found in the community presenting many of AFSP's programs. She is also an associate professor of political science at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. And we are joined by Tandra Rutledge. Tandra is the Director of Healthcare Systems Initiatives for AFSP's Project 2025. Prior to joining the Project 2025 team, Tandra served as a volunteer with the AFSP Illinois chapter and served on the Illinois chapter board and as co-chair of the chapter's Education Committee. Tandra worked with the chapter and the Illinois Suicide Prevention Alliance to host 2 statewide suicide prevention summits focused on Project 2025, as well as education and outreach to Black and faith communities in Chicago and surrounding areas. Thank you to each of our panelists for joining our important conversation today. And with that, I will kick it off with some questions. So I was wondering if each of you could tell us how you got involved with AFSP. Marissa, if you would like to start.
Sure. So I lost my dad to suicide in 2005, and it wasn't until 2008 that I got involved with AFSP. I saw a sign for an Out of the Darkness walk, and I actually wasn't even living in the state at the time, but came to town, did the walk, and knew then that AFSP was a community I wanted to be a part of, to be able to be around people who didn't have to ask the unanswered questions, but also understood the unanswered questions that we often have when it comes to suicide, and to see the incredible work that AFSP was doing. So not just fundraising, which obviously is so important in regard to suicide prevention research, but in areas of education and advocacy as well. And as a political scientist, I was especially excited to get involved with advocacy and to get others who were maybe scared of being involved in advocacy involved. And as a college professor, I was reminded that we don't just do this because of maybe family losses, et cetera, but I'm surrounded by people who want to talk about, need to talk about mental health, and need to be represented every day.
Tandra, how did you get involved with AFSP?
I got involved in AFSP in 2018, I believe. At the time, I was working at a local behavioral health hospital as a part of the senior leadership team. I am a mental health therapist by training, and I was attending a meeting. And at the meeting, the then co-chair of the chapter, Steve Moore, was doing a presentation sponsored by the Kennedy Forum, and he was talking about Project 2025. And I could not contain my excitement. At the time, our hospital was beginning our zero suicide journey. And everything that he talked about in terms of AFSP's bold goal, the 4 critical areas, I was sitting in my seat and couldn't contain my excitement. I was like, there's an organization that's actually doing this, and got really excited. Steve and I joke about it. I rushed him after the meeting. We set up a time to talk, and I guess the rest is history. I got involved. Working with the chapter, working around with the chapter in the hospital, working around Project 2025 and advocating around the 4 critical areas. So that's how I got involved with AFSP as an advocate.
Awesome. And James, how did you get involved with AFSP?
Well, my close friend died by suicide in 2009 in April. And after getting my master's degree, they didn't teach back then a lot about suicide prevention, the typical warning signs. So I went online and I went for my school specialist for suicide prevention specialist certificate with the American Suicidology Association. And then I got a call from some lady down in Washington who was was wondering if I would be willing to join the team to start a chapter of the AFSP here in Alaska. So she gave me the website. I went through the website of AFSP and talked about a week later, and I joined and was one of the founders of the chapter up here.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yep.
Tandra, what have you learned about yourself by being an AFSP advocate?
That is a great question. So I have learned that I really love advocacy. I really didn't realize it. I've been an advocate all of my life. When I think about, from a young girl, I've always been an advocate. Advocates speak up on important topics, and I've done it all of my life in different forms. It's interesting. Several years ago, I was the state director of advocacy for a nonprofit. And when I think about that time, I remember thinking, why did they vote me to be the state director of advocacy? Because I remember in that role feeling like advocacy was something outside of myself. When now what I've learned from my work with AFSP, that it's very much something that has always resided inside of me. And I think through my work with AFSP, I've really tapped in to that power that's always been inside of me and just had an opportunity to hone it and to have an amazing platform and an amazing community with which to amplify the voice and the message.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. And I think some folks can underestimate how powerful that can be. Mm-hmm. James, what have you learned about yourself by being an AFSP advocate?
Again, that's a good one. Actually, I learned that each individual has the power to change and to talk to our legislators, whether it's on a local level, federal or state level. We talk about our stories, and it's okay to cry about your story. We all, up here in Alaska, we all share something, and that's not the best thing to share. Is we all been affected by somebody who died by suicide, and to tell your story, it's okay. So I've learned the courage to tell your story, and it's okay to be yourself.
Absolutely. Marissa, same question.
Well, I do think telling your story is really important, but I'll add to that, which is listening to others. And I think we can get a lot done no matter our differences when we listen to each other. And, I think that's one of the things about being a non-professional advocate is there's lots of people who can understand how policymaking works, politics, but they can't share necessarily the same stories and they can't process other people's stories, find common ground, which I think I've also found is especially important, and just hearing each other out.
Mm-hmm. So Marissa, I'm going to ask you this next question, not to go back to back, but I think particularly with your experience, you'd be a good one to ask. What makes a successful advocate?
Oh, I think that's good. Great question. I think there's a few things. One is someone who is willing to share, but also knows how much to share. So a lot of people don't realize that a lot of visits or calls or contacts with legislators are quick, right? So they want to hear from you, but they also have all these other people knocking on their door and asking a lot for them. And so I think it's often hard for those of us who are comfortable sharing our story to share our story, but within a very short time frame. And so a successful advocate knows how to do that and knows how to connect, knows how to listen, and then also knows how to say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you with that information. So I think one of the things that scares people about advocacy is they think they have to understand everything about a bill or the ask they're making or be prepared to respond to every question. And one of my favorite things about AFSP is when you don't know the answer, you know who to ask the answer and they follow through and help you answer the question. So to me, one of the really key things is recognizing your purpose is to help be the face, help be the story, and then rely on others who can help you with the parts that might be more difficult.
Absolutely. James, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's also collaboration with different organizations because other organizations also share the same goals and be supportive in different the views and values of their stories as well. But the collaborations with other organizations is one of the ones important to me.
Absolutely, yes. Tandra, how do you stay motivated as an advocate?
That's a really good question. And I think that I have three things I think that really keep me motivated. The first one is I keep my why centered, like why I do this work. I'm passionate about mental health and suicide prevention. It's more than just what I do. It's my calling, and I tell people that. So I keep that centered. This is hard work. It can be emotionally and physically and spiritually exhausting. And so that leads me to the second thing is I also center self-care and make sure that I disconnect from the work and take care of myself and refuel myself, because this is, whole advocacy is whole body work. It's a whole body experience. So making sure that I have opportunities to disconnect from the work of advocacy and having opportunities for self-care and joy. And then another very important part of being motivated, and we've mentioned it here in our discussion today, is really having a community of advocates, of like-minded, mission-minded individuals like AFSP advocates, who are the best advocates in the world, really, that we can lean on, that inspire, that empower, that Marissa talked about, like, if we don't know something, they're willing to jump in and lend a helping hand. I think that helps keep me motivated. So those are three things I think that keep me motivated.
Yeah, I think the self-care part is a very important part to highlight. So thank you for sharing that. James, any additional thoughts?
I think it's the people that I work with, because I do work out in the villages and just talk to the youth and the families and listening to what they need and to be able to talk to our legislators. But I think to me, it's the families that I work with that keep me motivated.
Absolutely. Marissa, what do you want people who are new or hesitant to being an AFSP advocate to know?
Well, we've talked about really getting involved as an advocate, but you don't have to jump in 100%. And so I often encourage people just sign up to get the alerts, right? Start there. I often talk about how often can you find a volunteer opportunity you can do from your bed in your pajamas and make a difference and have your story heard. And so there's ways to step into it. And also, maybe it's attending your state Capitol Day, but you don't have to go alone. And if you're scared, there's also lots of opportunities ahead of time. So there's the AFSP 101 lobbying opportunity. Just share what's concerning you about getting involved and talk to people and hear us out. And maybe you'll see that it's not so hard. So we always, with our state Capitol Day and then also the advocacy forum, make sure that we're pairing people up who are new to advocacy with people who've done this before. And I think that helps. So knowing that you're not going to be alone, but that your story is going to make a difference, I think should hopefully make you less concerned about getting involved.
Tandra, what would you say to someone who is new or hesitant to being an AFSP advocate?
I really think Marissa said it very well. I would just add to what she said is sometimes I think we underestimate the impact of our voice, and knowing that our voice matters and understand that it's advocates that really made impact, in this, in mental health and suicide prevention. It's advocates' voices that, have led to, the National Suicide Hotline Improvement Act. It's advocates who raise their voices around mental health parity. It's our collective voices that have made these changes. Advocates, that are responsible for, the National School Lunch Program and Universal Kindergarten. Advocates, throughout history have raised their voices to make changes. And when our voices come together, there is power in that. And so just knowing that you aren't alone. And I would also suggest that anyone who's hesitant to go on AFSP's website and see and learn about our legislative priorities and the work that's being done to educate yourself, to become aware of the things that, AFSP that we're doing on behalf of mental health and suicide.
James, what would you say to someone who is new or hesitant to being an AFSP advocate? What would you want them to know?
You know more than the legislators. It's your story, and be yourself. I mean, I've taken quite a few youth out to the state capitol and even to the DC, 18-year-olds who have never done this before. And yeah, the first time they're hesitant, but when they get to listen, when the legislators listen, they feel empowered. So just be yourself. You know what you want. You know what they need. The legislators, you pay them. Simple. You're the boss. Just ask them what you need. Be straight to the point and be real.
Absolutely. So James, I'd love to follow that up with another question, because you mentioned students. What are some things we can do to engage youth to use their voices for suicide prevention and mental health?
Out here, I know what I need. So I can say what we need out here. I mean, because all the youth have been impacted by suicide out here, sadly. And yes, they need practice. You probably have to write up a little script for them, but it's easy. I mean, for someone to person to advocate, especially with the action alerts, where it's all pre-written, and all you have to do is type. They can make phone calls even to the tribal chiefs out here in the tribal villages that we have, to the local government. We have good connections with our federal legislators, so they're comfortable listening to our youth. And surprisingly, Suicide Prevention Week, the youth had called up Senator Murkowski, and they did interview her. And they did it themselves. I mean, we arranged the appointments, but they did it themselves. So they were able to voice their opinions just to give them the empowerment of any youth to be themselves.
Absolutely. Tantric, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think James hits on a good point about how we as advocates can support and empower young people and others, right? You know, Marissa, you talked about it as well. People who are hesitant, raising voices for our young people is so very important. And seasoned advocates and the community of advocates of AFSP play a very important role of supporting that, the voices of others, you know. So thank you for sharing that, James. I think that that's really important. And I think that's a really important role, particularly at this time in our country when we are really facing a crisis with youth and mental health concerns around the country, and particularly in your state of Alaska and the unique challenges that you all face there and across the country. So thank you for sharing that and for highlighting that. And I think that that's an example for us all, you know, for us all to think about ways that we can, if we're not already engaging young people in our advocacy efforts, that we should. So I thank you for sharing that with us, James.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And Marissa, as someone who also works with students regularly in your community, do you have anything to add about how we can empower youth to speak out about suicide prevention and mental health?
Sure. I think that we need to convince youth that they'll be listened to. I don't think it's an issue of will they spend the time, do they know how to reach out, so much as they feel unheard. So they see legislators making decisions about what can be taught in their schools, or, you know, what can do their body, what doctors can help them with, and, you know, that they're going through, and they just feel unheard. And so a lot of my college students will talk about the bickering that happens in politics, and they feel like they're not part of the conversation. And so convincing them that they can be part of the conversation now, not just when they're older and have been voting for a long time, I think is the real barrier that we need to overcome.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. Just letting young people know that, you know, you have a voice and it will be heard. Very important. So Tandra, I will start this one with you. What is something any person can do to advocate?
Well, May is Mental Health Month, and I was thinking about this, and when Marissa talked about being in your PJs, you know, and getting advocacy alerts and being able to share your story, with it being May being Mental Health Month, there, you know, AFSP has a campaign, Demand More for Mental Health. And I think that many of us have shared our stories, and we have talked with one another. We've raised our concerns with legislators. And I think that it's time for us to raise a collective voice and demand more. I think we can go to the website. I'm sure we'll share the website. I don't want to get it wrong. moreformentalhealth.org, I think. Yes. moreformentalhealth.org. So I think that what we can do is share a demand for mental health with your community and raise your voice for mental health and suicide prevention. I think that's one thing that all of us can do, especially for Mental Health Awareness Month. Marissa mentioned signing up as a field advocate. Everybody can do that, and you can do it from the privacy of your own home. Marissa also talked about getting involved with your local chapter, the state advocacy days, the advocacy forum, which is coming up, which will be virtual this year. But even if you are hesitant to go out and meet with legislators, you can still sign up for the email action alerts. I know that was more than one thing. I realized that.
There's a lot of work to be done.
There is a lot of work. So let me dial it back and go back to May is Mental Health Month. We want to demand more for mental health. And please, 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 the one thing that we are asking is take the first step and share your demand for mental health with your community. Join us and raise your voice for mental health and suicide prevention, and go to moreformentalhealth.org. That's the one thing that everybody can do right now. And also sign up for the email action alerts. I'm sorry.
It's okay. James, what is one thing that someone can do to advocate for suicide prevention and mental health?
Gee, what's left? She said everything just about. Attend your local city hall meetings. It is Mental Health Month. And spend some time with open forum and have your voice heard. I mean, I would also add just the city hall, but she had covered everything just about. And that's great. Less for us, but no, attend the city hall meetings if you can.
Marissa, any other one thing someone can do to advocate to add?
That is such a good list, but I did think of one thing.
All right.
Form or start building a relationship with a policymaker. So we've talked about ways you can reach out with action alerts, advocacy days, but the goal ultimately would be to have someone or someone's that you have a relationship with. So that way, when, a bill is about to be sponsored or a bill comes across, they know who to call to get that expert advice. Because like James said, our organization is, probably knows way more, is more of an expert, can be a partner with legislators who are working on the issues that are so important to us. And so it's great when we connect with them when we want something, but we also want them to connect with us when we can be an asset. So I think reaching out to your state or national representative or your city council member so that you just start forming that relationship and then checking in. They come home a lot if you're talking about your national representatives. They have recesses. They often will have town halls that you can visit. Establishing a relationship and keeping it going can be especially valuable to the work that you're doing.
And we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much to our panelists, James, Marissa, and Tandra, for joining today's conversation. For those tuning in, we hope that today's conversation has sparked your interest in advocacy. And here are some easy things you can do today to advocate for suicide prevention and more for mental health. The first thing you can do is sign up as an AFSP advocate at afsp.org/advocate. That's how you can get action alert emails about AFSP advocacy activities in your area and across the nation. If you want to see what policies AFSP supports in your state and at the federal level, go to afsp.org/action center. There, in as little as 2 minutes, you can be connected with your legislators and ask them to support better policies for suicide prevention and mental health. And if you want to see more of AFSP's May campaign to demand more for mental health, go to moreformentalhealth.org. Thank you for tuning in with us. And thank you again to our panel of advocates. And remember, this May, we're asking for more for mental health. Have a great day.